Excellent. Good evening, everyone. Can everybody hear me? And if you can, let us know in the chat window. Yes, okay, I'm getting from people that they can hear me. Excellent. Welcome and good evening, everyone. My name is Lindsay Glassner. I am the Outreach Coordinator for the K-12 Education Group here at the Lab of Ornithology. I'm joined today with Kelly Schaefer, our Education Specialist, and we are going to be talking about nature and birding clubs. I realized I had no overarching idea of, these are the 3 things you absolutely have to do if you're going to start a club, and realized that when I spoke to our educators that we've worked with over the years who have nature or birding clubs, many of them have given a lot of different advice and recommendation. And one of the biggest pieces of information I've learned is that no birding club is the same, and they're going to have so many different time constraints, number of meetings you're going to have, age groups you're working with, and the overall goal that you're trying to accomplish with the club that you're doing. And so tonight's webinar is going to be a little bit structured a little differently than what we've done in the past for those who've attended our webinars before. We're going to spend the first few minutes of this webinar where you guys are going to share with us what your goals are in a nature club. And to do that, we're going to use the chat window. So quick introductions. We're with the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, for those who aren't familiar with us. We are associated with Cornell University. However, we are a membership-driven institution where our mission is to interpret and conserve the Earth's biological diversity through research, education, and citizen science focused on birds. And specifically, Kelly and I are with the K-12 education program. And what we do is we develop innovative resources that build science skills while inspiring young people to connect to local habitats, explore biodiversity, and engage in citizen science projects. So you'll recognize there are a few different themes between the lab and who we are. One is citizen science, and we'll touch on that today. But a big mission that I think is really at the heart of why Kelly and I are so passionate about the work that we do is we really strive to connect kids to their local environment and feel a sense of place for themselves in their hometown, in their home environment, whether it be rural, urban, suburban, what have you. And we find that clubs could be the best way to do it. So what I'm going to have you guys do is in the chat window, share with us a few of your questions I'll show in just a minute. But to utilize the chat window, we have, what I recommend is exiting full screen so you won't actually enter full screen. In the center, you'll have a little chat quotation bubble, and in the right hand side, that's where you can enter your text. And that to button, I want to highlight that. If you can make sure that says to all panelists and attendees, that will allow a really nice discussion that can happen not only between you and Kelly and I, but between all the attendees. What we really recommend, especially for this webinar, is many of you guys have done similar ideas or scenarios with clubs. You might have a lot of great recommendations for each other. And so we want you to be able to see each other's goals and aspirations for a club and share advice for them. So if you can make sure that to button is sent to all panelists and attendees, that would be marvelous. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a quick little introduction. Let us know who you are, where you're located, and then answering these 3 questions. What type of club do you want to create? Do you want to just create a pure birding club? Do you want to just do an outdoor exploration club? Are you looking for a citizen science club or a STEM club? What do you wish to accomplish with your club, which also might talk about what you want to create. And this specifically will be, are you trying to just simply get kids outside? Are you trying to support kids with meeting science standards? And then another thing that'd be really helpful for Kelly and I and your peers in this webinar is to think about the frequency and length you'll be interacting with youth. Are you going to be once a week, 3 times a week, once a month? Is it going to be for only a half an hour or for several hours? Do you have the opportunity for a long day, etc.? So if you can, we're going to take some time for you guys to answer out these questions in the chat window. And again, send to all participants. That would be wonderful. And I'm just going to have real quick, if you guys want to answer these questions all in one group instead of separately. Okay. And Kelly and I are going to kind of be perusing and browsing this. And I'm seeing quite a few different people from St. Louis, in Ohio, Colorado. You can do elementary citizen science club once a week for an hour. A club including the Bird Sleuth Nature Conservation meeting bi-weekly for an hour. Alberta. Georgia, Vermont. I didn't know there was a Georgia, Vermont. A green club, that means an hour once a week. We're looking for a nature club to connect families to nature, plant the seeds for lifelong learning. Wonderful, Robin. A bird conservation club once a week. Looking for outdoor activities on the focus of that, and okay. Working with kids 2 times a week to get kids to learn more about birds and creating more of a bird-friendly environment. That sounds wonderful, Joanne. Community garden activities. Citizen science stuff would be wonderful. A nature birding citizen science club, okay. Okay, Amanda, looking for that science content standards, but really want it to feel more like a fun club atmosphere. A bird club. Looking for families again. So I'm seeing a lot of people are looking to meeting about an hour's length time period, which is good, and around once a week or once a month. Quite a few people are looking for birding specifically, which is no surprise. I expected at least half the people to be around birding with this being the Cornell Labs webinar. But also seeing people who are looking and interested in citizen science. We have a few environmental educators looking for families, and so wanting to do more family-friendly activities. Looking a lot to just connect kids outside, getting them outside whenever possible. Also looking for ideas to help best advertise this. Okay, we can definitely talk about that, Phoebe. So many of you are looking to either just start a club or seeing how best to kickstart one. Some of the kids are already using the Merlin app. That sounds good. Excellent. Well, Kelly is diligently going through and she's taking notes on all these responses. So feel free if you have any other thoughts, ideas come up. Let Kelly know in the chat window. That's what her role is going to be tonight, is really trying to monitor things. And if she has any specific activities, ideas that will come up, she'll chime in during this discussion. Now, because as I discussed, clubs can all have their own different goals, priorities. The way I wanted to structure this was going to first think about, 5 activities. And Kelly and I brainstormed a little earlier, and we thought about what are the 5 activities that are go-to that any form of nature or bird club would can just pick up and use. And again, our target age group for this is going to be more around the 2nd through 6th grade, but we do have opportunities to adapt activities depending on the age group you're working with. And so what I want to first introduce you guys is some of those activities and reasoning. And when I was going through this, like I said, we've talked with several educators before about what are the steps and processes for starting a bird club. And that's the biggest question. Why start a club in general? I've seen several of you respond that you really want to just focus on first connecting kids to nature. Some of you are talking about meeting science standards. Some of you are talking about getting families involved. Whatever that why may be, what I have heard from a lot of educators and what I strongly encourage you to think about is, what do the kids want to do? And Phoebe, you had mentioned that you'd been having some issues of kids actually signing up. And this would be a really great starting point to first figure out, well, what are the kids interested in themselves? A very successful birding club that happened with one of our partners, Janet, at the 12 Bridges school. It's the center picture here. And what happened for them? Their story is that Janet first just put up a bird feeder to have in their school grounds. She taught with it a little bit and the kids observed birds a little bit. But after a period of time, the students became really interested and involved with wanting to learn more about birds, and they became incredibly aware of how they want to help birds. And I know somebody was talking about how they want to have a bird club where they can make habitat improvements. And so what Janet did is, her intention was not to start a bird club right away, but was solely focused on trying to build awareness for kids around birds. And as that awareness built for the kids, then the interest to have a club arose within the kids themselves. It was that intrinsic motivation, which is very powerful for students. And so they were the ones who really pushed to have a bird club. And what it ended up being is that kids ended up spending their lunch times building these custom bird feeders, but also filling up the bird feeders, cleaning the bird feeders out, making sure that the water from the bird bath was clean and fresh. And it was the kids who really became motivated to take care and maintain of a bird habitat. And they were the driving force. And so that's something right there where I've heard from many educators off the bat, have the kids involved in what the club is going to look like. And, you know, maybe right at this time, you might not have a call or desire for a bird club specifically, but maybe this is where you as an educator can first start at a broader level, doing some general activities, some of the activities that we'll talk about today, and then that you can see where your kids' interests go and follow those interests. Sometimes that will put you out of your comfort zone. I know for me, if I was ever doing a bird club, I think, oh, how could kids not love birds? And I really push it. But if they're not going to fall in love with birds right away or push too hard, maybe just take a step back, let them explore nature. And it might be that they love trees or they love insects. And that might push me out of my comfort zone, but that's okay. I can learn with them. So that connecting kids to nature is incredibly valuable, and it's always been important within the education system, but really got a lift and more of a presence in the media-rich world, I should say, in the early 2000s when Richard Louv published his book, Last Child in the Woods, and he talked about this concept of nature deficit disorder, where there really is a disconnect between youth nowadays getting outside and connecting to nature. And one of our biggest goals is to take a student on the left here looking very disengaged, bored in nature, and really having them welcome nature in an open environment and feel accepted and ready to explore it and to embark in that journey of discovering what's in their local habitat and loving what's in their local habitat. So I think many of us educators will agree that at some level, us as educators, we want to connect kids to nature, that may not be the primary goal for some of you, but that is still an amazing benefit. So one of the processes that many of our curricula take root on is going through this process of first connecting kids to nature, then having them participate in citizen science, and then even allowing them to conduct their own investigations through student-driven inquiry. And this step, I think, is a really marvelous model for a nature club, where you can take kids through, especially if you have, if you're meeting once a week, you can have an entire semester, an entire school year where you can work with the kids of, yes, at the beginning, we're going to really just develop this connection with nature, building the observation skills, but that can progress very quickly into then participating in citizen science, which will kickstart even more observations and questions arising, and kids can then embark on their own investigation. And we've seen this happen with many different schools of naturally going through this process. So that first component, though, is connecting kids to nature. And I want to share some 5 activities around this. And Kelly, do you want to summarize people's thoughts or wait for a little bit? Okay. So what I have right now is I have 5 different activities that I want to introduce you guys to first just help them connect to nature, develop their observation skills. Some of these activities we really frequently push because we just love them so much. Other of these activities are new, and Kelly and I have done them in experience. We don't actually have written up from our team, but we can direct you to resources that are available. The first activity, which is one of our most favorite ones, we talk about this all the time, but that is because it is such a good activity, is a sound map. And the concept of a sound map is to really just have kids listen, to take a step back from the stimulating visual world there is and close their eyes and turn on their ears. And we do this by having kids just have a piece of paper and a pencil. Now, I will say this right now, I strongly recommend having things like nature journals during your club. And this is a great activity that you can do one of the first days with kids and have them do it right in their nature journal so they can always look back at it. But what they're going to do is simply put an X in the middle of their paper. And in that X, that's going to represent where they are. And then they can just simply close their eyes and listen. And as they hear something, they can start drawing or writing what they are hearing. For example, birds chirping, wind rustling leaves, frogs, mosquitoes buzzing, cars driving by, dogs barking. There's many different things that kids can hear. And the goal isn't to force them to try and hear something natural, but to really just listen to everything. And that includes the cars driving by. That can include people talking. Here at the Lab of Ornithology, when I do this activity with kids, we have an airport just across the street. So frequently, there's an airplane flying overhead. And that's something that we should include because for us at the lab, we often tune it out. It's just background noise. We might be able to hear the birds sing all the time, but we forget the airplanes fly by. And so for us, it's good to remember both the natural and man-made sounds and think about just everything that is around us. Because once you start to turn your ears on, you can't turn them off. You'll start to notice more and more things. And especially for those who are interested in hearing and identifying birds by sound, this is definitely a thing that you should do. Because this is the first step. As soon as you start to hear birds, then you will always hear birds, which can be annoying in some cases when you're constantly hearing a blue jay, but for the most part, it's really a joy to constantly hear birds. So this is the very first activity I strongly recommend starting with, and that is a sound map. This next activity, this is an activity that Kelly brought to us, I think it was last year, a year and a half ago, when we were first going through the Amazon, wasn't it?
It was.
And I love this activity that Kelly's introduced to us, and I'm obsessed with it now. and it's taking a mini hike. And by I mean a mini hike, I really mean a very, very meter-long hike where you can provide kids a meter-long piece of string or rope. And with that, they can set that anywhere within their front yard, the schoolyard, a nature garden, what have you. They can form a little circle and look inside the circle, or just drape that string on trees or bushes or in the ground. But their goal is to focus their observations on just that string and really have them start to hone in on those observational skills where a piece of grass that they never would have noticed before, they're not going to start to see little critters crawling by, or slight differences between the different types of grass there may be, or the types of tree, or what might be hiding under that tree bark. So, for example, we've done this, I've done this with educators only. I know you've done this with kids, and you found this to be really successful of just going through it.
Yeah, I've done it with high school kids mostly, which some people are hesitant to do simple activities like that with that age group, but it worked out beautifully, especially for kids who haven't really taken the time to look at something in that way. It can be a really moving experience.
And I found with little kids, from those I've heard, just giving them those 2 or 3 minutes for them to say, okay, write down 3 observations that you've made on this mini hike, essentially, can be really rewarding for them. And then maybe you have them drape it on in another location, and they just do a quick compare and contrast of those 3 different observations. For little kids, providing that little bit of barrier of just 3 observations in a very short period of time can be beneficial. For the high schoolers, when I've done this with teachers, they always recommend, okay, don't tell the high schoolers that you have a time limit. Of you have 5 minutes to do this. Instead, just leave it completely open. And the longer they sit there trying to procrastinate doing this, the soon enough they'll just give up and actually get involved, and then actually learn something and see something, which is really rewarding. So this is a great example, taking a mini hike. Again, having kids have a nature journal where they can write their observations is wonderful. But then it's really low key. All you need is a meter string or shoelace or yarn, twine. Very, very simple, and no supplies needed really. So our next activity I want to talk about is all around phenology. Now, what did you call this, Kelly, this phenology spot?
That's exactly
you
what
called
I
it. Phenology
it.
spot. Okay, I couldn't remember the name you called it. And it's so funny. Kelly used to work at Conserve School, a
semester-long, environmentally focused boarding high school for sophomores and juniors.
That's a mouthful.
It is.
So what is really interesting is the fact that as soon as she mentioned this was an activity that I did in college for one of my natural resources class. And I know that this is definitely an activity that's done even at the elementary age group with a lot of citizen science projects like Project Budburst. And phenology is wonderful. It's definitely a topic that has to be addressed within that elementary age group. But again, we're focusing on developing the observation skills and connecting kids to the local environment. And the whole purpose of this is to have a phenology spot, one location that the kid adopts. I love that. The fact that class adopts a tree. Exactly, Phoebe. Where they go through and they make weekly observations of what is happening there. But though it seems something so mundane to us of, okay, first week, the tree has leaves. Second week, the tree has green leaves. Third week, the tree has green-yellow leaves. You start to see that this weekly journal observation, though might seem mundane from week to week, as soon as they start to see over the period of time, it really does make a difference. Now, some of you guys are engaged really with this concept of citizen science as well. Working with a project like Project Budburst, where you can start to know when exactly the buds are coming out for certain trees, for certain plants, those observations can immediately be contributed to citizen science. And then you can start comparing your observations to other observations around the country and around the world. So this is just another great one where you're just going to adopt, I love that, adopt a tree, adopt a spot. You can do it as a class or you can do it individually, especially if you want to bring in some of the arts. Having kids actually draw some of what they're seeing is really beneficial too. Okay, here is another activity. I love this activity. This is one of our go-to ones. It's all around making a field guide. Now, we're the Lab of Ornithology. So in case you didn't realize, we're a little bit obsessed with birds. And we do this activity with birds all the time. However, this activity can be used for trees, for leaves, insects, a diversity of wildlife. And so I've done this, I've seen a modified version of this with beetles too. For those of you guys who aren't aware of beetles, it's not beetles the insect, it's beetles the education group. But it's very simple, and it's a matter of having kids choose or be assigned a bird, insect, whatever. Maybe I'm going to stick with birds for our example here. So we work with kids and have them each assigned a common bird in their area. And so they're going to write the name of their bird in large font at the top. So this one is a common yellowthroat. And then they're going to focus on creating a scientific drawing of your species. And we recommend having kids, especially for older audiences, look at two different sources. This could be a drawing of a field guide, because as you may be aware, field guides tend to be more drawings and they tend to be more idealized of what you're likely to see. You can also look at photographs, which are realistic, but many birds don't follow that ideal aspect. They might have different slight patterns or feathers out of place. So looking at several different images or drawings to really figure out what the bird should look like. And then focusing on labeling field marks. For any of you who want to talk about anatomy, this is incredibly big. I immediately just thought, when I said field marks, I immediately thought of, oh, it'd be cool to do a field guide sort of for monarch butterflies and identifying the different stages and having them draw out different stages for monarch butterflies. Birds, you don't really have as many stages, so to say, as a butterfly, but still, that would be another great example of how you can point out some different characteristics. For birds especially, sound is incredibly important, so having kids listen to the sound of the birds. For the common yellowthroat, it's just so sweet, sweet, sweet. I'm so sweet, right?
That's the yellow warbler.
Yellow warbler. Oh,
common yellowthroat is
witchity, witchity, witchity.
That's
there we
one.
go. I'm slowly getting my bird calls.
It's a process.
It's a process. But that's a really great thing about having a field guide. And what we really encourage is having kids be responsible for just knowing one species. And then they themselves can become the expert in that one species. When we've done this, for the most part, I've mostly done this with educators, but I have seen done with kids. But with my educators, I did this in New York City with a group of after-school educators. And this one woman knew nothing about birds, and I assigned her the European starling, which, if for any of you guys in New York City, or if any of you know anything about birds, European starlings are everywhere. And she had no idea what they were or the thought process. And despite the fact that they were invasive species, she was just enthralled with the bird because this was her bird. She felt ownership of the European starling. And after we did this activity, we went out on a quick little bird walk. And this is one of the reasons why it's really important to set up the kids for success and having them choose birds that you're likely to see. Because lo and behold, we went out for a bird walk. She saw the European starling and flipped out, almost scared them all away because she was so happy to see it. But she turned over and, was promptly starting to share all the features. Oh, this one's in breeding plumage. This one isn't in breeding plumage. You know, they're Shakespearean birds. They were only 100 released years ago, and now they're all over the country. And she was just so excited to share her knowledge about the European starling that it was really beneficial to her herself, that she knew that bird. And that's what we've seen with kids too, is they really take ownership of that's their bird. And it allows some great discussion and pride for the kids, where they can share their knowledge that nobody else knows. So with this field guide, what we've done is we've talked about the name, field marks. I always like to include some simple things like, what is the diet? Where are you likely to find the birds, such as the habitat? Are there any cool facts? For such birds that may look similar to other birds, like an American crow, for example, trying to put out distinguishing field marks that you might look for with the American crow. But this is a wonderful activity that I highly recommend, whether it is for birds, insects, trees. I'm trying to think of fun facts about trees, but I'm not a tree person. I'm sure there are fun facts.
Oh, there are so many fun facts about trees.
Clearly I'm a bird nerd, not a tree nerd.
I was just reading recently, and I can't remember the term now, but for when tree crowns won't touch each other. So and there's amazing photos that look like highways in the canopy because the crowns won't.
I saw that too.
Intersect.
That's interesting.
So there's all sorts of cool things going on.
Well, and especially with trees, what I love is the pressing of leaves, because that's also very memorable. Takes a little more materials, but still fun. So again, this making a field guide is another great activity. You can have kids draw the bird, write in their nature journal, or you can have them do it on a separate piece of paper and then collect all the pieces of paper together and actually create a formal field guide. But there's many different ways to go about it.
So Karen was asking if anybody had ever tried doing something like this, with doing field observations first and then coming in and adding information after consulting reference guides. And that's a really great way to do things. If you're doing something like a nature journal, it can be a really powerful experience to hold off on naming things. I don't know if there's a name for this phenomenon, but naturalists will also often talk about how when you name something, like, people feel like they know it and they move on. So by withholding the name, you can actually have a more meaningful engagement with whatever you're looking at. So if you can go out and make these observations, then challenge somebody to identify something from their drawings and then research it in that way. That can be a great way to go about this too, especially if you have older kids. It can be a richer experience for them.
Yeah, I love that idea, Robin, and especially going that route where you're first making the outdoor observation before naming something. You can really challenge students to focus on patterns that they're seeing as well.
Yeah, and Robin was just saying that it makes sense to observe first what's in your own region, then use research skills to find info. So you can absolutely do that with your own physical observations. If that's something you don't have time for necessarily in the classroom, there's ways to use the Merlin Bird ID app and eBird to find the birds that are in your area. So as a teacher, you can have a really focused list of birds that you're giving kids. So you're not going to give them something that they're not going to see, or that they're really unlikely to see. And we can go into specifics about how to find those things, but it's also in some of our archive webinars too. So
I say we have a very specific webinar all around, both this year and last year. Last year is already archived. This year it's going to be coming up in May time period. So we can share the archived one with you. And it goes through step-by-step how to use the Merlin app to figure out what birds are in your area at what time, to give you a narrow list and to help, especially if you yourself don't feel comfortable with bird identification. Oh, that's wonderful, Robin. That's great to hear. Yeah, the Merlin app, so many people come up to us, I love your app. I wish we could take credit for it specifically.
We love it too.
We do. We're just not app developers, but it really is amazing. So the final activity I want to talk about, I am slightly surprised I haven't I never saw this in any of, oh, I did see one thing talked about STEM, I see, is STEM activities or engineering activities as well. And a great activity is some kind of engineering design component. And this relates to how kids can also help their local habitat as well. And that's just having kids design or make their own bird feeders. This image specifically is a screen capture from one of our free resources, Feathered Friends. It's designed for elementary educators, and it's a lot of just pick up and go activities. So if you are in the elementary age group, you're looking for a lot of simple, fun activities, I highly recommend downloading Feathered Friends, and Kelly will share the link to that in the chat window.
Sure will.
And this is one of the activities that I highly recommend, which is making a perch feeder. Very simple to do. There's lots of instructions around this. However, if you want to take that step further and really focus on the engineering and design process, don't focus on making a perch feeder, but having kids design their own bird feeder. And this is an activity that we are in the process of actually formalizing and releasing it in 2019, a whole series on engineering with birds. And one of those is having kids design their own bird feeder. I'll be happy to briefly explain the directions here, but if you are interested in the rough written up instructions, just let us know and we can send you that in email, because we are going through the review process of those lessons right now. But essentially what it is we focus on having kids design a recycled bird feeder. And by recycled, I really mean, what do we call it? Random junk, I believe is the proper term that we use, where these can be things such as old Tupperware, clothes hangers, fabric, bits and baubles of metal and plastic. When we do this activity, we try and avoid common things such as plastic soda bottles and really push the creativity. But depending on the age group you work with, having things like soda bottles, yogurt containers, and so forth are really beneficial. And it's very simple. You provide kids with this set of random junk, so to say, and encourage them to work in teams of 2 to 4 people and design a bird feeder. Now, depending on the background knowledge you've already done with these kids, or depending on your overall goal, I would recommend first having them observe birds feeding or talk about what makes a good bird feeder and setting some parameters for them. So, for example, one thing that we like to talk about is most bird feeders are hanging bird feeders. So the bird feeder that they're going to create should be able to hang. The next aspect is most birds need somewhere to perch so they can actually eat the seed. So having things like a perch, for example, this wooden spoon here is a perch for the soda bottle feeder. So a place for birds to perch is really beneficial. Another thing to think about is weather. You don't want your seed to be open and get filled with rainwater and then start sprouting. You want to make sure that your seed is protected. So these are all different things to think about, to work with kids and think about when they're going through the design process. And then having them actually make the bird feeder. And then what's really beneficial is have them fill the bird feeder with seed, hang the bird feeder out, and give it, a week or two and see, are birds actually going to visit the bird feeder? If they are visiting the bird feeder, what could they improve? If your feeder fell down after 2 days, how might you better help hang it up? So not only testing the bird feeder, but then bring it back in, go through a redesign process, have them critically evaluate their bird feeder and think, what could they improve? So this is a really, really great activity to do, to really challenge kids to think about, one, how are they helping birds with their environment by providing food, but two, what makes a good food source for birds, and critically think about the engineering process. So what we've done thus far is really talking about some simple ways to connect kids to nature through these 5 activities. And many of them are revolving around nature journals. All of them can be really hands-on and getting kids outside. It's all around that nature connection that we talked about in the beginning. Now, if you recall, we like to go first with connecting kids to nature, but then to start participating in citizen science, which can lead to their own investigations. And so I want to briefly share with you guys some citizen science projects. Now, citizen science, for those who aren't familiar with it, these are projects in which volunteers or citizens of the world are partnering with scientists to answer real-world questions. Essentially, scientists can't be everywhere. They need our help to gather observations. And what's wonderful about citizen science is there are projects all over the world, ranging from being completely outdoors to completely online to a mix of between. Some are seasonal, some are year-round, some provide you curriculum to support the project specifically, but there are a lot of resources available to help you get started. Now, at the lab, we have 6 different citizen science projects, but what I want to first introduce you is not just bird projects, but other citizen science projects that are available. And the best way to search for these projects is through SciStarter. And the nice thing about Zoom is I have the opportunity to share my screen with you guys. So we're in SciStarter here. The URL is scistarter.com. Kelly will enter that in the chat window. And what's wonderful about it is you can actually create an account, or you can just go through Project Finder. She's slowly typing it. Calm. So the URL is in the chat window right now. But what's great is you can go through and find a project. So let's give an example, Kelly. Give me a location.
Minnesota.
Minnesota. Okay, and give me a topic.
I want bugs.
You want bugs? Okay, insects and pollinators. Find a project. So very simple. We're just starting off with the basics, a broad location and a general topic. One of the very first ones we're getting at, integrated monarch butterfly monitoring strategy, bee spotter, Midwest invasive species, ooh, mission monarch, a bee hunt. Where's the elderberry longhorn beetle? That's very specific. So you can see there are a lot of different projects. Ooh, a leaf pack network. I bet I know what that is.
Oh, I did leaf packs in elementary school.
I did it in college. So there's a lot of different things. And you can see, wow, there's over 100 different projects just with pollinators in Minnesota. And we can go through a lot of these. We can match quality, newest, oldest, so forth. Let's go specifically, instead of all activities, let's look for something that can be done, on a hike, let's look at on a lunch break. I don't know why, but that sounds like it might be nice, easy, low-key.
Lunch break, I like
yeah,
it.
Bumblebee watch. I love this. eButterfly, I've heard of this one before. Helps document butterfly distribution in Canada and the US. Let's look at eButterfly. So just by clicking on it, we can see who the people are associated with this, what their overall goal is for eButterfly, and what they're going to be asking you as a user to do. You're going to be reporting butterfly sightings. When looking at the real-time description, or looking at the description, online checklist and photo storage program, it's providing new ways for butterfly communities to report, organize, and access information about butterflies in North America. And so it's really focusing on creating a database, very similar to what eBird does, it sounds like. And through time, each participant, observation, checklists, and verification builds this database. And that allows us to really understand butterfly data with the global community of citizen science, educators, lepidopterists, that's such a fun word, conservationists, and land managers. and it will become the foundation for a better understanding of butterfly distribution and populations trends across North America. So this seems like a really cool project if you're interested in doing some butterfly observations. When you get to share them, how long it takes, types of activities. They have a whole series of training materials, it looks like. And so this is a great opportunity where you can go through SciStarter and just start to figure out different projects that are available, what meets your needs, and so forth. So again, this is just a one great opportunity for you to see if you're interested in the Cornell Labs citizen science projects for educators. You can just go to our website here, birdsleuth.org. If you scroll down, we have a whole tab right here on citizen science. And this was a series of blogs, but the very first blog is Citizen Science for Educators. And this blog will break down our 6 citizen science projects, the season, geographic area, what tools are required, and then provide you descriptions and the educational resources associated with those. So for example, eBird, this is our large citizen science project. You can see it's any season worldwide. You need to be able to look at birds and have access to the internet. Project Feeder Watch, this is about to start actually in November. And so you'll see Project Feeder Watch here. It's helping scientists track bird populations and monitor birds in the winter, essentially. And these are all the resources available around Project Feeder Watch. So that is SciStarter.com. I highly recommend it. And what we've discovered, do you recommendation for? Oh, yes. Yes, we do actually. Joanne, and if you're in the US, Kelly is going to share a link to Binocular Grant, and I'll talk about that momentarily. So SciStarter is a great starting point for your citizen science projects, and what you'll see is kids will start naturally asking more and more questions, and that can lead to their own investigations. We do have a free download called Investigating Evidence. And what this curriculum does is it takes you as the educator through the entire scientific process of helping kids make observations, ask questions, design their own experiments, and so forth, so that it's super easy for you to support kids to conduct their own investigations. For a club setting, this is something that I recommend if you are going to be working with kids over a longer period of time, and if you think that they're have the willingness and eagerness to do it. This is not something I recommend you starting off with right away with kids in a club. Instead, start with that nature connection. But if you do want to go through the process of, and you start to see the kids are eager to conduct their own investigations with all the questions they're asking, this is a great starting point. So Kelly has just shared several different links in the chat window, including the citizen science projects that are with the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, including Investigating Evidence, this curriculum, as well as our Binocular Giveaway. I realize we now have 10 minutes left, so I'm going to leave this open for questions. Before I depart, 2 things I want to talk about. The first, for those of you who do need to receive formal continuing education units, CEUs, you can purchase CEUs for these webinars from Cornell University. There are 2 options for you. The first is you can just complete 1 live webinar, fill out an evaluation sheet, create and execute an implementation plan. The second option is to attend 5 live webinars, complete their evaluation sheets, and just create an implementation plan. The difference is you don't actually have to implement it. So those are our CEU options if you do need formal continuing education units. If, for example, you don't actually need the formal CEUs, you can just email us, birdsleuth@cornell.edu, and we'd be happy to send you a very simple certificate of completion that just says the 1 contact hour for being here. Now, the second thing I wanted to talk about is this binocular giveaway. We have amazing sponsors, Celestron Optics. Somebody had asked us recommendations for quality binoculars that are good for elementary school students. The one pair of binoculars that we're giving away, I strongly recommend for elementary age students. They're the Celestron Outland X 8x42. The reason why I like those specifically is the optics come close enough for kids' eyes, which tend to be a little more narrow than adults, and so they actually can clearly see through the lenses. But we do have a binocular giveaway happening. The details of this are as follows. If you are a classroom teacher or are working with a classroom teacher within the United States, that includes all 50 states, not the territories, and unfortunately Canada is not eligible for this. If you work in a classroom or with a classroom in a school, whether public, private, charter, doesn't matter, but it has to be a formal school. Unfortunately, homeschool does not count as well. You are eligible to apply for this grant. It's just a one-page application, but the secret is you actually have to have a formal citizen science project that you can utilize the binoculars with. Now, this doesn't have to be a bird citizen science project, but just counting insects, for example, doesn't count. You actually have to participate in a formal citizen science project. The deadline to apply is October 1st. We are going to be supporting 15 classrooms, and each classroom will receive 10 pairs of these high-quality binoculars. So that is a giveaway. It is very competitive. I will say that right now we have over 300 people who have applied so far, and this is only the beginning of September. This is a very competitive process. So if you do you have any questions, comments, concerns, feel free to email us, birds@cornell.edu. I'm actually the one who chooses the winners. I cannot by any means guarantee who's going to be the winner, but I can give you advice on how best to submit an application that sounds worthwhile to me. And anything else, Kelly? Sounds good. Is there anything from people's...
No, I mean, there was a lot of similarities and a lot of overlaps in people's goals. Most people called out that they were interested in creating a nature connection and interested in activities that would cross over with families. A fair number of people called out birding and citizen science specifically. Hopefully we covered something that everybody will find interesting. But I loved reading about all your ideas and all the work that you're doing to create spaces for kids and families to connect to nature. And I think it's awesome.
Awesome, yeah. So I'm seeing quite a few different comments come in. One, Kelly, can you look up the specs and post the URL for the Celestron Outland X 8x42s? That would be great. The next comment I saw was, oops, not that button. Let's open up this chat window. Do you have recommendations? You're at a children's garden with school groups that visit. Does this qualify? So, Jeannie, what we are looking for is you actually have to pick a specific school that you want to partner with, because just with our sponsorship agreement, the binoculars do need to go to a school. And so if you have a specific school that you're in partnership with, those binoculars become property of the school. That's just the way the sponsorship is written right now. Amanda, thanks for sharing. So anybody who's looking for a literature connection to help spark that nature connection or interest with birding, there's this new novel, The Someday Birds by Sally J. Pla. I have not read that before, but thank you for sharing, Amanda. We'll have to look that up. Joanne, the Celestron binoculars are in there now.
So we have a question about whether they can reapply for the garden grant now knowing.
Yes. Jeannie, what you can do, sorry, I lose my voice. So even if you try to reapply, it will kick you out. Send us an email, thebirds@cornell.edu. What I'll do is I will delete your old application so you can reapply. Any advice on how to increase membership to our clubs? How can we reach more students? That's a really great question.
Paige, can you remind us, are you in a school? I think
you work for a nonprofit.
I'm wondering about, like, if you're maybe a nonprofit, a nature center or something, you have a location, if you can do some kind of like interest day where you have sort of the examples of the activities that people might be doing on the weekend, so people can come check it out and get excited about it, because sometimes folks have trouble finding kids. Like, I know this is an issue with some of the 4-H clubs who try and do work with us, is that the kids don't know that they're interested in birds until they've had the opportunity to think about birds and see birds. And once they get the club going, they always see that there's interest, but it can be difficult to get started. So I guess my advice is there some kind of way that you can preview the sort of activities so people will understand what you are advertising?
Yeah, and sorry, typing and writing doesn't work.
Typing and writing and speaking.
Speaking, thank you. Really, it struggles. The other thing. So Karen's talking about bribery with snacks. That's what I'm thinking too. Is bribery, so to say, with an extraordinarily cool guest lecture. So there are several different nature centers, likely around your area, that has raptor programs or visiting wildlife. So doing some kind of snack opportunity. I see some people are talking about have a contest to give away a bird feeder. And so that might be something really interesting. What you can do, I'm thinking of, it'd be nice to know what your specific goals are with the club and see what we might be able to direct you with to motivate those kids. So like what your goals are for the club, what age group you're trying to target, and go from there.
Jeannie, you were asking about Audubon's February bird count. It's not the Great Backyard Bird Count, is it?
It is ours.
It is ours? Okay. It's
yeah.
with Audubon.
Yeah, so that's with the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. We're the ones who house the Great Backyard Bird Count, and many local Audubons will, in fact, host events for those.
Yeah, so if you are doing that just with the general public, there's not necessarily a whole lot of prep you can do besides having some field guides and things available. But if you're doing it with a school, I would recommend doing some prep with Bird ID, the local field guide, having Merlin available, doing like a pre-event bird walk. Just get kids used to the protocols before the actual time to collect scientific data arrives.
Yeah, so she's doing it with kids. So if you have opportunity to work with kids beforehand, that'd be great. If you only have the opportunity to work with kids then, that's where I would look at giving them the tools. So simply putting binoculars in the hands of kids automatically changes their mentality and perception, and they
if
feel
you present
powerful.
it in a way that these are tools for science, you know, and you back that up, they can be really effective. Sometimes if you just hand them to kids and they go a little off topic.
We have a video on that, don't we? The 5 steps for success.
But what I was thinking is if you just have them for one period, if you have the ability to put out a feeder, because that counts for the Great Backyard Bird Count too, like a week or two beforehand, and then you yourself are familiar with the type of birds that are coming, that's going to be able to help you identify them better. You can have a small field guide of the birds that you've seen to look through so that you can just limit the options and make it simplify it.
Yeah, Paige, feel free to email us. There's some great recommendations that people have put in here. Somebody talked about doing an egg drop in front of the library windows, so maybe taking kids outside and birding in front of library windows could be beneficial. But yes, feel free to email us and we can help provide more specific information. We realize it's now 7 o'clock. Kelly and I will hang out for a little longer in case anybody has other questions. But as always, you are welcome to email us, birdswith@cornell.edu, to let us know or ask specific questions or follow up with us. This webinar is being recorded, which means I should probably stop the recording now.